Palabras más, palabras menos.
Entramos al cuarto bloque de Palabras más, palabras menos. A ver, típica discusión entre el Loto y yo muchas veces. Él propuso hacer una nota con un inglés, hablando en inglés sobre Keynes. El inglés se llama Robert. Yo, para mí, cuando Marcelo me dice la cosa, creo que está loco, que es un marciano que a nadie le va a interesar. El inglés se llama Robert Skidelsky, es miembro de la Cámara de los Lores británicos, es un tipo que escribió 3 tomos sobre Keynes.
Una biografía,
una
muy monumental.
Y ahora acaba de escribir The Return of the Master, el regreso del maestro, que es bestseller en el mundo de los economistas. Cuando me dijo esto dije, no le va a interesar a nadie. Lo invitó acá Alfonso Prat-Gay. Y hace un rato lo vi y es un lujo poner lo que van a ver al aire. Realmente es una cosa...
Por Skidelsky.
Por Skidelsky, por el inglés increíble. Viene en talento para hablar inglés, viene Menem, Cavallo y Slotoviana tercero.
En ese orden.
En ese orden. En serio, lo que van a ver ahora, si pueden, quédense porque es realmente una cosa de muchísimo nivel y permite ver como un tipo muy importante nos cuenta cómo está el mundo y dentro de ese mundo la Argentina, que aunque no lo creamos, queda en este mundo. Disfrútenlo.
Mr. Skidelsky, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure to be here.
First question. 3 years ago, 2 years and a half after the subprime crisis, everybody was Keynesian. Everybody asked for, almost everybody asked for more public spending, more fiscal deficit, but now perhaps we are in the beginning of a new crisis, and we listen many economists, but also many politicians recommending the opposite.
Yeah.
No? Why?
Well, I think when the crisis started, I think everyone realized it was a very, very serious downturn, and business as usual wasn't on the cards. And I think I would describe the initial reaction as instinctive Keynesianism rather than theoretical Keynesianism, because the theory of Keynes was in a cupboard. It hadn't been used for 30 years. But they realized something had to be done, and you had to avoid another Great Depression. But there hadn't been a conversion to Keynesianism, really, and especially not by the markets. And so once recovery started, the guns started to turn into an opposite direction. And one of the reasons was that the fiscal responsibilities or debts of the government, governments who had largely rescued masses of the private banking, increased, and so the credibility of governments became an issue. And that's why I think austerity became the flavour of the month. You can date the turn more or less to the beginning of 2010. This is in Europe, at any rate, with the beginning of the Greek crisis.
We know that what Keynes recommends for recession. Everybody knows. But what about the other side? Countries that are growing at 7, 8, 9% with inflation. What would he recommend in that situation?
I think what he'd be asking about the Argentinian situation, or that of fast-growing countries today, is what are their fiscal policies tight enough? And are they printing too much money? And at that point, he becomes an orthodox economist. I mean, his unorthodoxy was to deny that economies were always or generally at full capacity, and that they had automatic means of recovering, and that if you had a recession, all you needed to do was to let the market recover.
So last week in Germany, in Lindau, in the summit of Nobel Prizes, Joseph Stiglitz praised Argentina, his macroeconomic policy, but on the other side, Edmund Phelps said that it was all lucky. Argentina was lucky with what happened in the world, with the commodity prices. Which of the stories do you prefer?
Well, you know, if your commodity prices are going up, if the main source of your budgetary revenue and also demand is just growing. You don't have to be very skillful, you know, in conducting your policy. I mean, you have to be skillful in avoiding excesses, because these things don't last. We know that commodity prices have a cyclical nature to them. There's a huge amount of speculation in the commodity markets anyway. If your economy depends very heavily on cyclical factors, then you've got to actually think always of tomorrow and prepare for the downturn. And I don't think, I'm not saying that Argentinian policy was unsuccessful in the last 7 or 8 years since the crisis of 2001. But obviously it benefited from terms of trade shifting in its favour, and for quite a long time, because it benefited from a sort of boom in the world that turned out to be unsustainable, actually. That boom had large elements of bubble in it, and it crashed in 2008. 2009. Then there's been a modest recovery in parts of the world, and therefore commodity prices have picked up again. But is this going to last? I don't think so. Not if Europe remains flat, not if the United States remains flat, not if China has to slow down as it will.
Let me talk about the future, not the near future. Do you imagine, do you want another system after capitalism, something different from capitalism in some years, many years from now?
Well, it's very, very hard. It's a very good question, because all the alternatives have been sort of discredited. It's hard to think other than capitalism forever, forever, forever. But there will be another system. And I think there'll be two things. First of all, I think there'll be another kind of economics in 30 or 50 years. I think this...
What do you mean, another kind of economics?
Well, it's no good, a lot of it. It just doesn't give you a realistic picture of the world. And it was terribly bad in the run-up to the crisis. And macroeconomics failed miserably. So what I think's been starting to happen is people have said, well, let's not just study what we're doing now, but let's think more in terms of political economy. Let's pay more attention to history, to philosophy, and broaden what we mean by economics, which is a study of human behavior in certain departments of life. So I think that's one thing that is going to be very different. But capitalism is a system which came into existence in order to accumulate capital. Now, in those countries in the world in which capital accumulation is no longer such a high priority, because they already have enough, there'll still be technology, but there won't be that single-minded obsession on growth.
So?
So what? Well, it'll be a hybrid system. It's not, in my view, going to be socialist. I don't think it's going to be socialist in the classic sense of the government owning the economy. But I think it'll be much more of a mixed system. There'll be less emphasis on growth. There'll be more emphasis on social welfare, or welfare rather than growth. And I think more emphasis on non-marketable elements.
For example?
Well, just community life, friendship, leisure. The things that people value in life, but which don't get passed through markets. Capitalism, in the end, marketizes everything. I mean, that's its tendency. And therefore it distorts value and tries to channel all value into price.
Vieron que era un lujo, la verdad que bárbaro. Antes de irnos, lamentablemente nos